It was one of those winter nights that felt like the whole world had turned into a block of ice. The air was sharp, the sky gray and heavy, and the snow just wouldn't stop falling. For hours it had been coming down hard, covering everything in white. The wind howled through the empty streets of the small town, pushing against doors and rattling windows. People stayed inside, lights glowing faintly through frosted glass, hoping the storm would pass by morning. But out on the highway that cut across town, a lone car crawled along the icy road. Inside it sat a woman named Linda, and her 2 young kids in the back seat. They had been driving home from her sister's place 2 towns over when the storm hit earlier than expected. What was supposed to be a 2-hour trip had already turned into 5, and now the road signs were disappearing under thick snow. Linda could barely see the road anymore. Her hands were tight on the steering wheel, her knuckles white. The wipers scraped back and forth, but the snow just piled up again within seconds. Her son Eli kept asking from the back seat if they were almost home. Her daughter Mia had stopped talking altogether and was curled up under a blanket, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "We're fine, sweetheart," Linda said, trying to sound calm, but her voice trembled slightly. She had one eye on the road and the other on the fuel gauge, which was sinking dangerously low. The wind picked up again, slamming against the side of the car like a wave. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Linda slowed down, her headlights cutting through a wall of snowflakes. There wasn't another car in sight. No streetlights, nothing but white stretching in every direction. Then the engine sputtered. At first she thought it was just the cold, but a few seconds later it happened again. The sound made her stomach twist. She pressed the gas pedal gently, praying it would keep going, but the engine coughed, jerked, and died completely. The car rolled to a stop in the middle of nowhere. "No, no, no," she whispered, turning the key again. The engine made a weak clicking sound but wouldn't start. She tried again. Nothing. The silence that followed was worse than the storm. The wind screamed outside, and the inside of the car began to feel colder by the second. Eli looked up from the back seat, his voice small. "Mom, what's wrong?" "The car just needs a minute," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's just the cold." She tried her phone. 1 bar. She opened the map, but it took forever to load. The little blue dot flickered somewhere between towns, miles from anywhere. Her fingers were shaking now, not just from fear, but from the cold creeping through the car. She turned off the interior lights to save power, but that made everything feel darker. The snow outside was getting deeper. If no one came by soon, they'd be trapped. Meanwhile, not too far away in a small garage on the edge of town, Derek was finishing his last job of the day. He was a mechanic, had been one for almost 15 years. The kind of man who fixed cars not just for money, but because he genuinely loved figuring things out. His shop wasn't fancy, just a big metal shed with a single heater that rattled when it ran. But it was warm and smelled faintly of motor oil and coffee. The wind outside howled against the walls, but Derek barely noticed. He was used to nights like this. Winters in that part of the state were unforgiving, and when the storms hit, they hit hard. But tonight felt worse than usual. The radio in the corner crackled with weather updates, road closures, power outages, emergency alerts. He sighed and wiped his hands on a rag. No one should be driving in this mess, he muttered to himself. He was about to lock up and head home when a voice came through the local CB radio he kept by his workbench. It was mostly used by truckers, but sometimes emergency messages came through. The voice was faint, broken by static, but he caught enough to make out the words. "Woman. Kids stranded." Near County Road, Derek froze, leaning closer. He turned the dial slowly, trying to get a clearer signal. Car stopped. 2 children. Need help? The message repeated once before cutting off completely. He stared at the radio for a moment. He could easily stay where he was. The storm was dangerous, and the roads were nearly impossible to drive on. But the thought of a woman and her kids stuck out there didn't sit right with him. He looked toward the corner where his old tow truck sat, a faded blue pickup with chains on the ear, tires and a winch bolted to the back. It wasn't pretty, but it was powerful. He grabbed his thick coat, his gloves, and a thermos of hot coffee, then headed out into the blizzard. The moment he opened the door, the cold hit him like a slap. Snow whipped across his face, and he had to lean forward just to make it to the truck. The engine groaned before it finally roared to life, and the headlights cut through the swirling snow. Back on the road, Linda was losing hope. It had been nearly an hour since the car had died. The windows were frosting from the inside now, and she had wrapped both kids in every spare blanket she could find. They were huddled together in the back seat, their breaths forming little clouds in the air. Her phone battery finally gave out. The screen going black, she wanted to cry, but she couldn't, not in front of the kids. She had to stay calm, but her fingers were numb, her lips trembling. Every sound outside made her heart jump. What if no one came? What if they didn't make it till morning? Then, in the distance, she saw it, a faint light moving through the white haze. At first, she thought she was imagining it. But then the light grew brighter, cutting through the snow. It was a truck, big and sturdy, fighting its way down the road. Her heart started to race. The truck stopped just ahead of her car, and a man climbed out, wrapped in a heavy coat and a wool cap. He trudged through the snow toward her, his flashlight beaming against the glass. "You all right in there?" he shouted over the wind. She rolled down the window just enough to hear him. "My car died. My kids are freezing." "All right," he said firmly. "I'm going to get you out of here." He went back to his truck, grabbed a thick blanket and two smaller ones, then returned to help them. One by one, he lifted the kids out, wrapping them tightly before helping Linda climb out last. The cold was brutal, cutting through their clothes, but the moment they stepped into his truck, they could feel the warmth from the heater. "Thank you," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't think anyone would come." He smiled softly, snow clinging to his beard. "No one gets left out here if I can help it." As the kids huddled together in the back seat, Derek drove carefully through the storm, the wipers fighting against the snow. He knew these roads by heart, every curve, every dip. But even he had to go slow, the wind pushing against the truck like it wanted to turn it around. They finally reached his shop after what felt like forever. The lights glowed faintly through the storm, a small patch of safety in a sea of white. He parked the truck inside, shut the doors, and helped them out. "Let's get you warmed up," he said, leading them to the small heater in the corner. He handed Linda a mug of coffee from his thermos and gave the kids bottled water and a pack of crackers from his desk drawer. The warmth hit their faces, and for the first time that night, Linda could breathe again. Her hands were still shaking, but from relief now, not fear. "You saved us," she said quietly. "You really did," Derek shrugged, trying to downplay it. "Just doing what anyone should." But deep down, he knew not everyone would have gone out there that night. Most people would have stayed home, watched the storm through the window and hoped for the best. But something inside him wouldn't let him ignore that voice on the radio. Maybe it was because he'd been in tough spots himself before. Times when all it took was one stranger's kindness to make a difference. As the snow kept falling outside, the small garage became their shelter. The wind still roared, but inside it was warm, safe, human. And though none of them knew it yet, that night, the night when a simple mechanic decided to drive into the storm, was only the beginning of a story that would change all their lives in ways they could never imagine. The storm outside raged all night, shaking the walls of the small garage. The wind whistled through tiny gaps, making the old metal building creak every now and then. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oil, rubber, and hot chocolate, the kind of mix that somehow made the place feel homely, even in the middle of a blizzard. Derek moved quietly around the shop, checking the heater every few minutes to make sure it didn't go out. He had pulled out some old blankets from a storage box and made a small spot near the workbench for the kids to rest. They were asleep now, wrapped up together, their cheeks pink from the warmth. Their mother Linda sat nearby on a stool, holding the warm mug he'd given her earlier. Her eyes were half open, watching her children with a tired but grateful expression. "You should try to get some rest," Derek said softly. She shook her head. "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see the road. I really thought we weren't going to make it." Derek nodded slowly, understanding. "Yeah, that stretch of road gets bad when the snow hits. You're lucky the radio picked up your call." Linda frowned slightly. "You heard that?" "Just a bit. Static mostly. But enough to know someone needed help." He leaned against his workbench, arms crossed. "You did the right thing staying in the car. Most people try to walk for help, and that never ends well." She looked down at the mug in her hands. "I was about to. I didn't know what else to do. The kids were getting so cold." Her voice cracked a little, and Derek could see how close she had been to breaking down out there. He'd seen it before, people stranded in storms, panic setting in, hope fading minute by minute. The worst part wasn't the cold or the snow. It was the feeling that no one was coming. He didn't say anything for a while. He just let the silence hang there, comfortable in its own way. The heater hummed softly, and outside the snow kept falling like a curtain of white. After a few minutes, Linda spoke again. "Why'd you come out? I mean, you didn't even know me. You could have stayed safe inside." He gave a small smile. "Because I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. That's not how I was raised. My dad used to say, if you can help, you help. Simple as that." Linda studied him for a moment. His clothes were still damp from the snow, his hands rough and stained from years of work. There was a quiet strength about him, not the kind that came from muscles, but from the way he carried himself. Calm, steady, real. She nodded slowly. "Well, I'm glad you were raised that way." Derek chuckled. "Yeah, me too. I like to think he'd be proud I didn't turn into some grumpy old man who only fixes cars and yells at the TV." That made her smile, for the first time all night. He grabbed a small toolbox and crouched down beside her stalled SUV, which sat in the corner of the shop under a flickering light. "Mind if I take a quick look? Might as well see what's wrong while you're here." "Please," she said. "That thing has been giving me trouble for weeks." He popped the hood and leaned in, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. The sound of metal tools tapping softly filled the room. Every so often he'd mutter something to himself, small mechanical notes that only made sense to someone who'd spent half his life fixing engines. Linda sat quietly, watching him work. There was something oddly comforting about it. The way he moved, the confidence in his hands. It was like he could fix more than just the car. Maybe he was fixing the night too, piece by piece, making it less terrifying. After about 20 minutes, Derek wiped his hands and straightened up. "Fuel line froze up," he said. "Common thing in weather like this. Once the engine warms, it'll be fine." "So it's not too bad?" He smiled. "Nope, I'll get it running by morning." Linda exhaled, relief washing over her face. "Thank you, really. I don't know what we would have done without you." He shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see if I can actually get this old thing to start." That made her laugh softly, and for a moment the tension in the room lifted. He went to check on the kids next. They were still asleep, curled up under a blanket on the floor. The boy's hand was holding onto his sister's arm protectively. Derek smiled at the sight. He remembered being that small once, sleeping beside his own younger brother on cold nights when their old house heater would give out. They hadn't had much, but they had each other. That had been enough. He looked back at Linda. "They're good kids." "They are," she said quietly. "And they've been through a lot lately." He didn't ask what she meant. Sometimes it's better to let people talk when they're ready. Instead, he went to the small fridge in the corner and pulled out a few things. "Some sandwiches, an apple, and a bottle of orange juice. It's not much," he said, handing them over. "But it'll do for now." She looked surprised. "You keep food here?" He grinned. "You'd be surprised how often people end up stranded in this town. I learned to keep a few things handy." She took the food gratefully. "You really think of everything, don't you?" "I try," he said, sitting down on the stool beside her. "Besides, it beats eating instant noodles every night." They both laughed quietly. It wasn't loud or forced, just the kind of laugh that comes when people realize they're finally safe. Hours passed and the night deepened. The heater kept humming. The storm outside showed no signs of slowing. Derek worked on the car for a bit longer, while Linda dozed off on the chair, her head resting against the wall. When he noticed her starting to shiver in her sleep, he quietly walked over and draped another blanket over her shoulders. He didn't know why he cared so much about a stranger he'd just met. Maybe because she reminded him of how fragile people can be when life decides to throw something hard their way. Maybe because he'd seen too many times how easily kindness gets overlooked in the world. By the time dawn started to lighten the edges of the windows, the storm was still heavy, but it had softened. The snow had stopped piling so fast, and a faint orange glow peeked through the clouds. Derek poured himself another cup of coffee and looked around. The garage was a mess now, tools scattered, blankets everywhere, but it felt alive. For once, it wasn't just a place filled with engines and machines. It felt like a shelter, like something human. Linda woke up slowly, blinking against the dim light. "Is it morning?" "Almost," he said, smiling. "The worst of it's over." She rubbed her eyes and looked toward her kids who were still asleep. Then she turned to him. You stayed up all night? Somebody had to keep an eye on the heater, he said. Didn't want it to go out. You didn't have to do all this. I know, he said simply. But I wanted to. She didn't say anything for a while. She just looked at him, like she was trying to understand why someone would go so far for people they didn't know. Maybe there wasn't an answer. Maybe that was just who he was. A few hours later, the snowplows started clearing the main roads. Derek stepped outside to check how deep the snow had gotten. The cold hit him immediately, biting at his cheeks, but the sight was peaceful now. The whole town looked buried under a thick white blanket, untouched and silent. He could hear the faint hum of engines from far away, the world slowly waking up again. When he went back inside, Linda was helping the kids pack their things. Looks like we might be able to head out soon, she said. Yeah, Derek nodded. Give me an hour and I'll have your car ready. She smiled faintly. You really don't stop, do you? He laughed. Not when there's work to do. As he worked on the SUV again, the kids followed him around, asking questions about the tools and machines. He answered patiently, even letting Eli hold a wrench for a bit. Mia was quieter, watching everything with wide eyes. When she pointed at a photo taped to the wall, a picture of a younger Derek standing beside a shiny old pickup, he told her that was his first truck, the one he'd rebuilt from scratch. Her face lit up like she was hearing a story from a superhero. By the time the sun finally broke through the clouds, the car engine roared back to life. The sound filled the garage like music. Linda's eyes widened. You did it. Told you I would, Derek said, grinning. She's good to go. The kids clapped and jumped up and down. It was such a small, pure moment that it made Derek laugh too. As they got ready to leave, Linda turned to him. I'll never forget what you did for us, ever. He waved her off. Just promise you'll drive safe next time. I will, she said, and thank you. Really? He watched as she and her kids climbed into the car, waving through the frosty window. As the SUV rolled down the newly cleared road, Derek stood there for a long moment, the cold air biting his face, his heart oddly full. He didn't know it yet, but that simple act of kindness, driving out into the storm, helping a stranger and her kids, was about to ripple farther than he ever imagined. The story wasn't done. It was only just beginning. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a world that looked brand new. Everything outside the small town seemed quiet, wrapped in white like a painting. The roads were lined with thick snowbanks, the trees glittered with frost, and the sun peeked through a pale blue sky that felt calm after the chaos of the night before. Derek stood outside his garage that morning, sipping his coffee from a metal mug, watching the town slowly come back to life. Plow trucks rumbled down the street. Neighbors were digging out driveways. The air was sharp but peaceful. He could still see the faint tire tracks from the SUV he had fixed and sent off just hours ago. He smiled quietly to himself. Helping that family had been the right thing to do. He didn't expect anything from it. He didn't even know their full names. But something about that night had stayed with him. The look of relief on their faces, the sound of the kids laughing when the car finally started, the way their fear turned into hope again. It reminded him why he loved what he did. Fixing cars was one thing, but helping people, that was something else. By the time he opened the shop for the day, a few locals had already come by to thank him for checking on folks during the storm. News traveled fast in a small town. People had seen his truck out in the blizzard and guessed what he was up to. He just smiled, shrugged, and went back to work, pretending it was no big deal. That afternoon, while he was tightening a bolt under a pickup truck, his old flip phone started buzzing on the workbench. He wiped his hands on a rag and answered it. Hello? Hi, is this Derek? A woman's voice asked. It sounded familiar. Yes, ma'am. Who's this? It's Linda, she said quickly. The woman you helped last night. I just wanted to make sure I reached the right number. You gave me your card before we left. Oh, hey, he said, smiling without realizing it. You and the kids make it home all right? We did, she said, her voice full of warmth. We got home safely this morning. The roads were rough, but your fix held up perfectly. I just wanted to thank you again. You don't have to thank me, he said. Just glad you're safe. I know, but I wanted you to know how much it meant to us. The kids haven't stopped talking about you. My son keeps saying you're a superhero. That made him laugh. Superhero. I don't know about that. More like a tired mechanic with an old truck. Well, either way, she said softly. You saved us. We won't forget it. They talked for a few more minutes. She asked about his shop, how long he'd been doing this kind of work and how often he got calls like the one that night. He told her stories about other winter rescues, an old farmer stuck in a ditch, a young couple with a broken alternator, and how helping people had become second nature to him. By the time the call ended, there was something light in Derek's chest. He didn't know what it was exactly, but hearing her voice, hearing gratitude that genuine, reminded him that small acts could ripple far beyond what you expect. That evening, as the sun set behind the snowy hills, he cleaned up his shop, turned off the radio, and sat on the old couch near the heater. Rusty, his aging brown dog, hopped up beside him with a soft groan. Derek scratched the dog's ears and let out a deep sigh. He felt tired but satisfied. The storm was over, the roads were clear, and everyone he knew was safe. That was enough for him, or so he thought. The next morning, something unusual happened. When Derek got to the shop, there were 2 cars parked outside, both unfamiliar. At first, he thought they were just early customers, but when he stepped inside, he saw a man and woman standing near the counter, smiling politely. The woman held a phone in her hand, and the man was wearing a suit, definitely not local. Can I help you folks? Derek asked, hanging his coat on the hook. Are you Derek? The man asked. Yes, sir. That's me. The woman smiled and held up her phone. We're from the local news. We heard about what you did during the blizzard. He blinked. News? Wait, what are you talking about? Apparently, she said with a grin, a woman named Linda posted about you online last night. Her story went viral. Thousands of people have seen it already. He frowned in surprise. Viral? Like, on the internet? The man chuckled. Exactly. Her post's been shared across half the state. She wrote about how you went out into the storm to save her and her kids, how you gave them food, blankets, and fixed their car. People are calling you the Blizzard Hero. Derek rubbed the back of his neck, feeling suddenly awkward. Blizzard Hero? That's a bit much, don't you think? The woman shook her head. Not at all. You risked your life for strangers. That's newsworthy. Would you mind if we asked a few questions? Maybe take a short video for our story? He hesitated. The idea of being on camera made him nervous. He wasn't the kind of man who liked attention. He fixed cars. He didn't chase headlines. But before he could answer, another car pulled up outside. It was Linda. She stepped out smiling when she saw him. The kids followed close behind, bundled up in thick winter coats. The moment they walked in, the little boy ran over and gave Derek a hug. You fixed our car, he said proudly, like it was the greatest thing anyone had ever done. Linda laughed softly. I told them we were stopping by to say thank you again. Derek smiled and patted the boy's shoulder. You all didn't have to come all this way. I wanted to, she said. And I guess we brought company. She nodded toward the reporters. They called me early this morning. I didn't realize how many people had shared the story. He looked at her, still a little stunned. You wrote about it? She nodded, suddenly a little shy. Yeah, I didn't use your full name or anything, but I just wanted people to know that kindness still exists. The world feels so divided lately, and what you did reminded me that there are still good people out there. He didn't know what to say to that. For a long moment, he just stood there, quietly absorbing her words. Then he smiled faintly. Well, I appreciate it. I just didn't expect it to turn into all this. The reporters took a few short clips, asked simple questions: what made him go out that night, how he stayed calm, what he thought when he saw the stranded car. Derek kept his answers humble and honest. I didn't think about it too much, he said. Someone needed help, so I went. That's all. By the end of the short interview, even the reporter looked moved. They thanked him again and left, promising to send him the link once the piece aired. After they were gone, Linda lingered a bit longer with her kids, helping the boy write a small note that said, "Thank you for saving us," in wobbly handwriting. She handed it to Derek with a smile. He took it carefully, like it was something fragile. I'm going to hang this right here, he said, pinning it to the corkboard behind the counter. Best note I've ever gotten. That made her laugh softly. You deserve it. They said goodbye soon after, and as Derek watched their car drive away, he felt something strange in his chest, a mix of pride, disbelief, and quiet joy. He wasn't used to attention, but it felt good to know that one small act could mean so much. Over the next few days, things got even crazier. People began stopping by the shop just to shake his hand or drop off thank you cards. A local bakery brought him a box of pastries with a note that said, "For our town hero." The mayor called to personally thank him for his courage. Even a few of his old customers, folks he hadn't seen in years, came by just to say how proud they were of him. But through it all, Derek stayed the same. He still worked on cars every morning. He still kept his coffee in the same dented mug. He still walked Rusty down to the diner for scraps of bacon on Sundays. The world might have seen a hero, but he only saw a man doing what he hoped anyone else would have done if they'd been in his shoes. One night, as he was locking up, he looked again at the note on his wall. The words were written in a child's uneven handwriting, but they carried more weight than any news headline ever could. He smiled, turned off the lights, and whispered to himself, "Guess that storm wasn't such a bad thing after all." He didn't know that something even bigger was coming. His story had traveled farther than he realized, and soon the kindness he'd shown on that freezing night would bring something unexpected to his store, something that would change his life in ways he never saw coming. The days after, the news story aired were unlike anything Derek had ever experienced. His quiet little auto shop, which had always been tucked away on the edge of town, suddenly became the center of attention. People he had never met started showing up just to say hello, to shake his hand, or to tell him how much his story had touched them. It felt strange at first. He had never been one for the spotlight. He liked his days simple, fixing cars, drinking coffee, talking with regular customers. But now the phone kept ringing. Journalists wanted interviews. Local schools invited him to talk to students about kindness. Even the town council sent him a letter of recognition, thanking him for his bravery during the blizzard. Derek tried to keep it all in perspective. He still opened the shop every morning at 8 a.m., still worked on cars the same way he always had. He'd smile and say thank you when people stopped by, but when the garage door closed at night, he'd sit on his old couch with Rusty beside him and just breathe. The attention was nice, but he didn't want it to change who he was. One afternoon, about a week after the story aired, Derek was under a car changing a timing belt when he heard the bell on the door ring. He rolled out from under the vehicle, wiping his hands on a rag, expecting another customer, or maybe someone else wanting a photo. But the man standing there wasn't from around town. He wore a long winter coat, his shoes polished, and carried himself with quiet confidence. His car, a dark sedan, was parked neatly outside. "Can I help you?" Derek asked. The man smiled politely. "Are you Mr. Derek Owens?" "That's me," he said, cautious but friendly. "What can I do for you?" "My name's Daniel Brooks," the man said, extending a hand. "I'm the regional director for Midstate Auto Group. You've probably heard of us." Derek nodded. "Yeah, I've heard of your shops. Big company," Daniel chuckled. "We try. But lately, I've been hearing more about you than about my own business." Derek raised an eyebrow. "Me?" "Yes, you," Daniel said, his tone warm but serious. "I read about what you did during that storm. The rescue, the repair, everything. It's not just a story about fixing a car. It's about what this business should be, helping people when they need it most." Derek scratched the back of his neck, unsure what to say. "I just did what anyone else would have done." Daniel smiled. "Maybe, but not everyone would have done it with the same heart. That's rare these days." He looked around the small garage, the worn floor, the old heater, the faded posters from decades ago. "You've built a good thing here. You can feel it the moment you walk in." Derek smiled faintly. "It's not much, but it's mine." Daniel nodded slowly, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folder. "I won't take much of your time, but I wanted to talk about something. See, my company's been looking to open a new branch in this region. Somewhere small town but connected. Somewhere people trust their mechanics. And after seeing how you run this place, I think you'd be the perfect person to lead it." Derek blinked. "Lead it? You mean manage a new shop?" "Not just manage," Daniel said, setting the folder on the counter. "We'd partner with you. You'd keep your name, your independence, but we'd provide new equipment, better tools, and access to our suppliers. You'd have a full team working under you. You'd be the face of it." For a moment, Derek didn't speak. He opened the folder and saw the plans. Brand new bays, lifts, a clean waiting area, everything he had dreamed of having someday but never thought possible. His small-town garage upgraded into something big and professional. "Why me?" he finally asked. "There are plenty of mechanics out there with fancier shops." Daniel smiled. "Because you care. I've run businesses for 20 years and I can teach people about engines, marketing, and numbers. But you can't teach heart. And you, my friend, have more of that than anyone I've ever met." Derek looked down, feeling a little overwhelmed. "I appreciate that. I really do, but it's a lot to take in." "Of course," Daniel said, his voice kind. "Take your time. Think about it. My card's in there. Call me if you're interested." They shook hands, and as Daniel left, Derek stood in the doorway watching him drive away, the wind carrying snow across the lot. For the first time in a long time, he felt uncertain, not about his skills or his work, but about what came next. He had always been content with his simple life. He liked knowing every customer by name, liked working with his hands, liked being part of a small town that trusted him. But this opportunity, it could change everything. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat on the couch with Rusty, staring at the folder on his coffee table. The papers looked too clean, too polished, too big for his world. Yet deep down something stirred, a quiet excitement, the feeling that maybe this was more than luck. Maybe it was a door opening after years of hard work no one had noticed. A few days passed. He kept busy, fixing cars, doing oil changes, and tuning engines. But the thought wouldn't leave his mind. Finally, one afternoon, he picked up the phone and called Daniel back. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "I've been thinking about your offer." Daniel's voice lit up. "I'm glad to hear that. What do you think?" "I think I'd like to talk more about it," Derek said carefully. "But if we do this, I don't want to lose what makes this place what it is. I don't want some big company taking over and turning it into something cold and corporate." Daniel's reply came without hesitation. "That's exactly why we want you. We don't want to change you, Derek. We want to build around you." After a long conversation, they agreed to meet again. Over the next few weeks, plans began to form. Daniel's company would provide funding for renovations, new lifts, and state-of-the-art equipment. Derek would remain the owner and lead mechanic. His name, Owens Auto Repair, would stay right on the sign. But now it would be bigger, better, and capable of serving more people than ever. Word spread fast through town. Everyone was excited. Customers stopped by to congratulate him. The local newspaper ran another story. Blizzard Hero expands shop with big new partnership. It felt surreal. Linda even came back with her kids to see the progress. They stood in front of the garage one afternoon as construction workers put up the new sign. The boy, grinning from ear to ear, said, "You're famous now." Derek laughed. "Nah, I'm just busier now." Linda smiled, watching him. "You deserve this, you know." "After everything you've done," he shrugged. "It's not about deserving. It's just nice to finally be able to help more people." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "That's what makes you different. Most people do things for what they can get. You do them for what you can give." He didn't know what to say to that, so he just smiled and nodded. By the time spring rolled around, the new shop was ready. The floors gleamed, the tools were neatly arranged, and the air smelled faintly of fresh paint and motor oil. Derek walked through the space on the morning of the grand opening, his boots echoing softly. He couldn't help but feel proud and a little emotional. Everything he had worked for, every late night, every long winter, every broken-down engine that taught him patience, it had all led here. People started arriving early. There were customers, neighbors, even a few of his old teachers from high school. The mayor gave a short speech thanking Derek for his contributions to the community. Then, in a gesture that caught him completely off guard, Daniel handed him a small plaque that read, "In honor of courage, kindness, and craftsmanship." Derek cleared his throat, trying to find the right words as the crowd clapped. "I'm not great at speeches," he said honestly, "but I just want to say thank you. Not for this shop or the plaque, but for believing that doing the right thing still matters. The night of that blizzard, I wasn't thinking about awards or attention. I just wanted to help. And if this place can remind even one person to do the same for someone else, then it's all worth it." The applause that followed wasn't loud or showy. It was warm, genuine. The kind that felt like home. After the ribbon was cut, people toured the new space. Kids pointed at the shiny machines, families took pictures, and Derek shook what felt like 100 hands. Through it all, he kept that same humble smile, the one that came from knowing none of it would have happened if he hadn't listened to that static-filled radio call on a stormy night. When the crowd finally thinned out, Derek stepped outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. He looked up at the new sign with his name on it and let out a quiet laugh. Rusty trotted up beside him, wagging his tail. Derek knelt down, scratching his ears. "Well, old friend," he said softly, "looks like we finally made it." He didn't mean made it as in money or fame.
He meant something deeper, the feeling that,
After years of hard work and small moments of kindness, life had finally come full circle. And though he didn't know it yet, the biggest surprise was still waiting around the corner. Something even more unexpected was about to walk through those brand new doors and change everything all over again. The weeks after the grand opening went by in a blur. The new shop was busier than ever. Derek and his small team of mechanics worked long hours fixing cars, helping customers, and keeping up with all the new appointments that came in each day. The once quiet garage had turned into a lively place full of chatter, laughter, and the sound of tools at work. Even though things had changed, Derek made sure one thing never did: the way people were treated when they walked through his doors. Every customer still got a warm smile, honest advice, and a fair deal. He still remembered how hard it could be to trust someone when your car broke down, especially when you didn't have much money. So he kept his word, just like always. Help first, worry about payment later. He didn't think much about fame anymore. The interviews had slowed down, and life was beginning to feel normal again. But deep down, he often found himself thinking back to that freezing night. The headlights in the snow, the kids shivering in the back seat, the relief when the storm finally ended. That memory stayed with him, not as something dramatic, but as a quiet reminder of how fragile and precious life could be. One chilly morning, about 2 months after the grand opening, Derek was in the middle of replacing a tire when he noticed a sleek black car pulling into the lot. It wasn't one he recognized. The driver's door opened, and out stepped an older gentleman dressed in a long coat and scarf. He looked refined, maybe in his late 60s, with silver hair and a calm presence. He stood there for a moment, just watching the shop before walking slowly toward Derek. "Morning," Derek said, standing up and wiping his hands. "How can I help you?" The man smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Owens. You probably don't know me, but I believe you helped my daughter a few months ago. She and her children were caught in that blizzard." Derek paused for a second. "Your daughter?" Then it clicked. The lady with the 2 kids, the one whose car had stalled in the storm. "Oh, I remember. I'm glad they're all right. That was a rough night," the man nodded. "It was. She told me everything you did for them. How you went out into that storm, how you brought them here, kept them safe, fixed their car. She said you saved their lives." Derek looked down, a little embarrassed. "I just did what anyone should have done." The man smiled faintly. "That's what makes it special. Most people would have stayed home. You didn't." There was a brief silence between them, the kind that carries meaning without words. The man reached into his coat pocket and handed Derek a small envelope. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said, "not just as her father, but as someone who believes in rewarding good men who do good things." Derek took the envelope carefully. "You really don't need to—" "I know I don't," the man interrupted gently. "But I want to." He gave a polite nod, then turned and walked back to his car. Derek stood there for a few seconds, unsure what to do. When the car drove away, he opened the envelope. Inside was a short handwritten note and a check. The note read, "Heroes don't wear uniforms. They wear work gloves. Thank you for bringing my family home safe. R.M." Derek looked at the check and blinked in disbelief. It was for $50,000. For a moment, he just stood there staring at it, his hands trembling. Then he slowly smiled, shaking his head. It wasn't about the money, though it was a huge help. It was about the message behind it. Someone out there had seen what he did and understood it not as charity, but as something human, something honest. That night, he sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee and thought about what to do with the money. He could finally pay off the shop's small remaining loan. He could fix up his old house. He could even take a real vacation, something he hadn't done in years. But instead, his mind kept drifting back to the people in town who came to him with old cars and worried faces asking, "Can you fix it?" "I'll pay you next week." He remembered the single mother who needed her brakes done before winter, the elderly man who couldn't afford a tow, the young kid who worked 2 jobs just to keep his old pickup running. They were the reason he'd started this shop, to make life just a little bit easier for folks like them. By the next morning, He knew exactly what to do. He called a small meeting with his team and told them about the check. Everyone's eyes widened when they heard the amount. But Derek just smiled and said, "We're going to use it to start something good, something that helps people who can't afford big repairs." They decided to create what he called the Kindness Fund. It wasn't complicated. Every month, a small part of their profits, along with what was left from the check, would go into a fund to cover repair costs for families in need. No forms, no red tape, just quiet help, the same way someone once helped him when he was starting out. Word spread quickly, but Derek never used it for attention. He didn't post about it online or hang a big sign in the shop. He just told people through word of mouth, and somehow that was enough. Soon others in town began to pitch in. A local parts supplier started donating spare items. A bakery down the street sent over sandwiches for families waiting on repairs. Even the high school shop class came once a month to volunteer. It became more than a repair shop. It became a symbol of community. On Saturday mornings, kids would come by to watch the mechanics work, curious and wide-eyed. Derek would show them how engines worked, letting them hold small tools and explaining each part in plain language. He loved seeing that spark of interest, the same one he had as a boy when he first fixed an old lawnmower just to see if he could make it run again. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the town in golden light, Derek stepped outside to lock up. He looked around at the shop, the clean bays, the fresh paint, the small crowd still talking near the counter. It felt alive. Just then, a familiar car pulled into the lot. It was the same SUV from that night in the blizzard, now shiny and running perfectly. The woman stepped out with her 2 children, all smiling. The little boy ran up to Derek and hugged him without a word. "Hey there," Derek said, smiling down at him. "How's the car treating you?" "Perfect," the boy said. "Mom says you're a hero," Derek chuckled. "Your mom says nice things." The woman smiled warmly. "I see you've been busy. This place looks amazing." "Yeah," he said, glancing around. "It's been a good year." She looked at him, her eyes full of gratitude. "I wanted to tell you, my dad came by a while back." "He told me what he did." "I hope you don't mind." Derek smiled softly. "Not at all. He's a good man. You're lucky to have him." She nodded, her eyes shining. "We're lucky to have met you." They talked for a while, sharing stories and laughter as the kids played with Rusty near the door. Before she left, she looked back and said, "I hope you know you changed more than just one night for us. You reminded us that good people still exist." When their car drove away, Derek stood there quietly, watching the taillights disappear down the road. A breeze blew across the lot, carrying the faint smell of oil, dust, and the promise of another day. Later that night, he sat on his porch, the stars clear and bright above him. Rusty lay by his feet, half asleep. Derek leaned back, thinking about how far things had come, from that lonely winter night to this warm, peaceful evening. He thought about the people he'd met, the kindness that had come full circle, and how something as small as stopping to help someone in the snow had rippled out to touch so many lives. He smiled to himself and whispered softly, "Funny how life works, huh?" The porch light flickered gently, the sound of crickets filling the air. He didn't need applause or recognition. The real reward was right there, in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that one act of compassion could build something lasting. And as he sat there, the world felt calm, whole, and exactly as it should be.